Hello, my name is Nancy Howell, and I'm here with the Center for Process Studies. The Process and Faith program is putting together this videotape to talk about the problem of sustainable agriculture. And particularly, we want to think about the theological challenge to our churches. So we've assembled a number of scholars from our area to talk about that subject. We have John Cobb, who is professor at the School of Theology at Claremont, and his field is theology, and he's written a book recently on economics and the problems that have to do with agriculture. We have Dean Freudenberger, also from the School of Theology, who has a long background in work that has to do with agronomy and Christian social ethics. And we also have Will Beardslee, director of the Process and Faith program, to talk about biblical perspectives on the same issue. You might wonder why we're doing this sort of videotape for churches. You might think that our audience might be better addressed if we were dealing with farmers and people in the Midwest. But we happen to feel that the problem of sustainable agriculture and the problem of our ecological crisis is wide enough that we in the churches need to address it personally. We need to take seriously our own commitments to the land and our own responsibilities. It's really easy for those of us in the church to sit back and act as critic of our societies. We can take a look at what's going on around us in terms of business and agriculture and economics and be very easily satisfied with pointing a finger at where the problems are in our country. But it seems to me that first we need to clean our own households and to start thinking about what contributions we're making to the ecological crisis because of our attitudes toward the land. Our own problems of consumption and our own biases about how food should be produced seem to me to be a problem here. I first became aware that the churches needed to look at themselves by reading an article by Lynn White, which points a finger back at the church, even though we're the ones who seem to think that there are other people responsible. It seems to me, and to Lynn White, of course, that the problem is that we have sort of an attitude of dominance over nature that's come from the way we read the Bible. It's certain that we do have imagery in biblical passages about the earth as a kingdom and about God being a king, but doesn't that translate into our having sort of a humanocentric attitude towards life? Don't we think that we are somehow special and privileged and that we should have dominance over nature in some ways? That makes us rather aggressive toward nature, and it makes us think of nature as an object, of the land as an object that we can just use. But, well, sometimes that troubles me. Some of the attitudes I'm suggesting seem at odds with biblical passages which suggest that, in fact, we are to have dominance over nature. And is that what the Bible really says?
Well, I think we've read the Bible by asking the wrong questions of it. It is true that human beings have a very special place in creation in almost all biblical passages you can think of. And specifically, there are passages in Genesis 1, say in Psalm 8, that are usually translated as if we are to have dominion over the earth. Let's think about it, though, for a moment. What's going on is that we're thinking about human beings in the way that we think about God. In both the passages I mentioned, it is God who gives human beings a responsibility. And it is because we have tended to think that God has total freedom to do as God pleases that we have read the passages as if human beings have the freedom, once God has given them this chance, to do as they please. I think if we look back at the whole passage within which we read these phrases about dominion, we'll see that it's different. That God is sharing creativity with the creation and with human beings. And the creativity, as far as human beings are concerned, has a very strong moral responsibility in it. We are to tend the creation, we are to shepherd it, not simply to dominate it. And if we think of it in terms of a God who does not dominate but shares creativity, rejoices in the creation's ability to have some creativity itself, and human beings likewise, we'll have a fresh way of reading the Bible that will open our eyes to the many places where there's a much wider view of human responsibility and the need to care for the creation and to live responsibly and gently within it.
Well, it seems to me the idea of the covenant in the Bible is also an important central theme, which points to the special place of humans in this world and in the creation. But does that covenant apply just to humans, or can we think of it in terms of nature as well?
Well, here again, we've so often thought of the covenant as being between God and human beings, and that is certainly a focal emphasis. But if you go back to the passages, you will see that the human beings with whom God enters into covenant are in the context of a responsible life in the world, the wider world, in this case of agriculture, which is there from the beginning to tend the garden and keep it. And there are passages we often haven't paid much attention to that make this point even stronger. In Hosea 2:18, the new covenant will be one where even the animals don't have to be afraid of human beings. And so I think we have to look not just at creation, but also at the hope of redemption, and see that the picture of a better way of being with the wider world is part of the vision, both in creation and in redemption. And for a long time, we didn't feel these were urgent problems. There are urgent problems now, and I believe that a new look at the Bible can remind us that God is always at work, but that God is not going to solve these problems for us. He shares creativity with us, and we have to take responsibility to live in this wonderful world in a way that will respect it and open it to a future for the world itself as well as for us.
Thank you, Will. Now, it seems to me that when we start to look at the way we've been thinking theologically and about the Bible itself, that there are some new options open to us. But first, before we begin to apply those things, those new ideas that come from our theology, it seems to me we have to address the problem itself. What is the actual problem we're dealing with? It's easy for us sometimes to look at a river and see that industry is dumping some pollutant into it. But about agriculture, we seem to take a lot of pride. And so maybe we need to talk with Dean about the problems. We think that the agriculture in the United States is highly productive and efficient, and is really important for feeding the world's population. So what is the problem?
Well, the problem is about fivefold to describe a complex issue. We talk about the high level of productivity, or if you count calories, it takes anywhere from 3 to 3,000 calories of fossil fuel energy to put 1 calorie of food energy into our system. That is not efficient. We're on a collision course with exhaustion in contemporary world agriculture, and certainly in American agriculture. So there are really five dimensions to the problem of American agriculture that's now pretty widely recognized. First of all, we are losing soil and soil fertility at rates unknown in previous moments of our history. Last year, for example, the erosion of our topsoil from rainfall and wind and snow melt was about 25% greater than at the peak of the Dust Bowl years. You were talking about what industry does to rivers. Well, you can almost walk across the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers upstream in the springtime because of the high runoff from our soybean, corn, and other grain fields. The second area of the problem in American agriculture is that, as I kind of alluded to in the beginning, we have technologically developed a food system or an agricultural production system that is totally based upon fossil fuel energy in the form of fertilizers, farm power, and pesticides. And here we're exhausting our natural oil and gas fields by the middle of the next century. So we have a technology that for high production in terms of high yields, but it's based upon an exhausting resource, and nothing has been done to change the direction in this technology at this time. A third dimension of the problem, which we're all pretty well aware of, is the toxicity in our food system itself, with the 30, 40-year buildup of pesticides and soil residues. We now have a dangerous food supply. A fourth dimension of the problem is pollution, particularly in the form of nitrate accumulations in our subsurface water supplies, particularly west of the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers, where after 30 years, 40 years, really since the Second World War, the consequence of heavy applications of fertilizers and pesticides have now moved down or leached into the subsurface water systems of our nation, and the same thing is in Western Europe, to the place where our water systems and other areas of the resource base are highly toxic. And finally, and really most important of all in terms of problem description, is the demise or the breakdown of the rural community and the farmer, the farm family, that seat of technological wisdom about caring for the earth in ways that Will was referencing in terms of stewardship and covenant. Employees of great agribusiness firms and insurance companies and pension funds being paid minimum wages do not exactly have the wisdom and the memory and the vision for the caring of such a fragile thing as land and all of the biological forms of life that go into the stabilization of the land. So this is how we have to understand the dimension of the problem of agriculture and our food supply, and as we're all conscious of the fact that most of the world is hungry and malnourished, and most of our nation is now urban-minded and simply understands the source of food as the local supermarket, we have to look beyond this to begin to see the dimensions of the problem that contemporary agriculture in America poses.
And this is terribly distressing to a lot of citizens in the United States who actually take pride in the amount of food that we're able to produce. It sounds as if, however, that we're not as productive as we thought. We're definitely not as efficient, and in fact, our systems are polluting the environment. Our
system is, if you simply look at productivity in terms of maximizing yields per acre within a given landscape, yes, the productivity is quite amazing, but when you begin to add up the cost of this productivity and to discount all of these other elements, pollution, toxicity, the loss of the knowledge and the supporting community, and certainly the loss of soil and water, it is now a totally destructive, exhaustive system. And I might just add briefly that no time in the history of Western agriculture, from the Greek city-states until now, has humanity invented an agricultural system that replenishes, let alone enhances, the essential resource base for the production of food and fiber. So we're on a collision course with exhaustion right now.
Well, given that we recognize the problem, it seems that it even goes beyond the land itself in some regards. John, you're working on a book on economics, or you've just finished one. Don't we need agribusiness? What are our alternatives in terms of feeding an increasing population? And won't our economic system be severely affected if we change our methods?
Certainly will have an impact on the economic system, because it's the economic system that has led to the kinds of things that Dean was talking about since World War II. He points out there have been problems throughout the whole period that human beings have been engaged in agriculture. But I'll just want to focus on the drastic speeding up of the destruction of the land that has taken place since World War II. I think that's quite consciously the application of modern economic thought to the land. And just the word land is very interesting to see in this respect. When we read about the land in the Bible, this is a very rich notion. The land is deeply prized, and of course the land includes its vitality. It's really an active agent in the whole process. And it's the flora and fauna are certainly not excluded when one speaks of the land. The land is the only term that's used in modern economic theory to refer to the natural world at all. So land takes the place of the biblical notion of land and of all the rich notions of nature. And then land itself comes to be used to mean really only space, or to be thought of finally as unimportant in economic calculations. So that economic theory is based on the notion that the exhaustion of natural resources is not a problem. And obviously, because they're replaceable with capital, that's the theory, technology, and so forth. But obviously, if you come and look at what's going on in agriculture with eyes that have been shaped, socialized by economic thought, you don't worry about most of the things that Dean was talking about, because all you are worried about is capital and labor. Those are the real factors. And as long as labor becomes more productive, which is what economists are chiefly concerned about, not even the land being productive, but really how much is produced per worker, then you can speak in glowing terms of what has been accomplished. One person today, with the aid of all of that, of the tractors and all the fossil fuels that are used, can take the place of, I don't know how many, 50 people perhaps, of the period before World War II. So productivity as measured the way economists measure it has been enormous. Of course, if you count everybody who's involved in all the factories that are producing all this equipment and so forth, it doesn't come out quite the same, but that's not usually the way in which it's looked at. So it seems to me one of the things that has to happen even theologically, and when I say theologically, I'm speaking of the theology that underlies our policies, not only theology as a kind of separated academic discipline that Christians engage in. Has to be the recovery of the sense of what the land is. A much more biblical notion of land would have a tremendous effect on the rethinking of what we're doing in all of our economic work.
This sounds like a big project to me. I mean, we've heard so many problems, and they range from practical problems having to do with how we do farming to the way we think and how we have structured our economic system. This is really sad news. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, and one hopes that there are some options here. There has to be some hope somewhere, I hope. So what would an alternative agriculture look like, Dean, and what could it promise us?
Well, it's interesting that you're using the word alternative, because on the way down to the studio this morning, I picked up from my desk the new publication that came out in September of 1969, a publication by the National Academy of Science and its agricultural board, entitled Alternative Agriculture. This is, for me, as exciting as the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the democratization of Eastern Europe is to all of us. This is a breakthrough of 20 to 30 years in American agriculture. In essence, this 450-page study conducted by the National Academy of Sciences over a 4-year period suggests that we must find alternative modes of production, alternative understandings of agriculture, our food systems and our food supplies, if we're going to get out of the kind of a problem that I described a moment ago. And the study points to the fact that there are in existence alternative models being developed in the private sector across ranching, vegetable gardening, orchards, livestock systems, grain production. I've seen many of these alternatives myself. Alternatives unfolding in the private sector outside the establishment of the land-grant colleges, their research, extension, and educational programs. And so the National Academy of Sciences this year is making a very firm criticism of the nation's agriculture and calling for new directions. And these new directions really mean directions toward, for the first time in human history, the emergence of what I call a sustainable or regenerative food system. That is, efficiency, looking at economics and technology in a whole new way. Efficiency in our economics and technology as it relates to agriculture and our food system is measured, first of all, by the degree to which it not only replaces the essential resources for food and fiber production, but even enhances this resource base. As one Iowa farmer told me a long time ago, said, "Dean, you know, if you can't leave the place in a better situation than when you took it over, you have no business messing around in farming in the first place." So alternative agriculture or movement toward a sustainable or regenerative agriculture is one that works toward efficiencies in the replacement of essential resources so that the resource base for food production increases through the centuries rather than goes in the direction that it now has gone. Tomorrow's agriculture will be in some ways similar to what our grandparents practiced before the era of fertilizer and pesticides. Pest control management along biological means, sophistication in crop rotation, the integration of livestock with cropping so that the manure doesn't pile up in feedlots and swine units of 100,000 animals, but is distributed evenly across the land, and that we'll be researching for the development of what we call an agroecology, which becomes somewhat of a carbon copy of the more original ecosystems which were cleared away as we introduced agriculture 2 centuries ago in this country. Tomorrow's agriculture, as we say, will be an analog of the original biotic community. The task ahead in research and development along these organic, biologically balanced lines is an immense agenda, and one I think that is beginning now within our land-grant college establishment and the agricultural research programs, which are funded to the tune of about $4 billion a year of our tax money.
Dean, you think by the 21st century we'll catch up with the Amish?
The Amish is a pretty close model to what we have to have if we're going to sustain our landscapes. We have to be there within the next 50 years, John, or too much will be lost in terms of biological diversity, in terms of species extinction, and soil loss, and all the other problems that I mentioned. But the Amish have a few more steps to go in that wherever soil is exposed to the direct sunlight and rainfall, even for short periods of time in the spring, as seeds germinate and plants begin to develop, the landscape is extremely vulnerable. And in most of our cropping areas, particularly our food and feed grain areas in the United States, climate is runs in extremes of heavy downpours, blowouts of wind and tornadoes, and weather fronts. We have to think even beyond the Amish model in terms of what we call zero tillage or permaculture.
You two are talking about a revolution here. This is no small project that we're discussing. And it seems to me it has to begin with some kinds of revolutionary thinking. And John, could you sort of summarize the shift in attitudes that has to come about, maybe particularly among Christians who are doing thinking about our human relatedness to the land? You've already started to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to me we do have resources in our Christian tradition for recovering a sense of our close kinship with the land. The Jews have never really lost that the way so many Christians and especially modern people have. So the Jewish scriptures are especially rich in resources for our recovery, but we have them also in the New Testament. But of course we don't only want to change the way we think in a sort of abstract way, we have to concretize it. And I'm fascinated by some of the ways people are trying to get us to look at what we do day by day as expressing our drastic separation from the land. David Orr, for example, at Hendrix College, got the students and faculty to agree to a study of the purchasing policies of Hendrix College. Now, this applies not only to food, but food was a major part of it. Most of us find, if we study these matters, that the food on our plate has traveled an average of 1,200 miles in order to get there. Well, that expresses, I think, this whole economic agricultural system, which detaches us so drastically from our actual land, the place where we live, that we measure everything simply in terms of dollars and cents and not in terms of its real relatedness. And simply by becoming conscious of this, Hendrix College was able, without spending any more money, to buy about a great deal of its food locally. And this helped the local economy. It helped to rebuild community, which is so drastically broken down. The food quality was improved in all kinds of ways. Everyone was better off. So that simply breaking the habits that have been institutionalized and built into our economic system and looking at ourselves and our immediate environment again. Just going to the farmer's market, of course, to buy some of your food is at least one step in that direction.
Well, our time is really short now, but Dean, could you maybe mention one or two other things that we as individuals could do?
Yeah. Number one, we have to be willing, and we need to appreciate the fact that when we go to the grocery store, there might be a blemish in the tomato or the apple, or there might be a little aphid in the cauliflower or the broccoli, or there might be a worm in the top of the tassel of corn. The farmer, the primary producer, understands these things, but the demands of the consumer are so high now for the cosmetics in their food products that it puts the producer in a very difficult position. And I would say too that one of the causes of the environmental abuse of agriculture and the fact that agriculture contributes so heavily to our whole environmental crisis worldwide, let alone this nation, is the fact that we have lived with a policy of cheap food, and someday we as consumers have to be willing to pay for what it costs to produce food on a regenerative basis so that there's economic stability in the farm family and in the rural community. There are many other things, but I would say let's really start to look at how persnickety our demands are for cosmetic enhancement of our food products. And secondly, we as Americans know that in terms of our monthly budget, we pay the lowest percentage for our food of any nation in the world, and the land suffers because of this kind of a policy.
Thanks, Dean and John and Will. I think we've got a lot to think about and a lot of questions to ask ourselves about our behavior and our thoughts toward the land. Thank you.